this happened last winter. My girlfriend, Megan, and I had been looking for a quiet getaway, somewhere far from the city, from work, from everything. We settled on a small cabin deep in the forests of northern Minnesota. It was a last-minute deal, the kind that seems too good to be true. The listing described it as rustic but modern, secluded, with direct access to a frozen lake and miles of untouched wilderness. The drive took nearly 7 hours, and by the time we reached the long, unpaved road leading to the cabin, the sun was already setting. Thick snow blanketed the ground, and the only tire tracks were our own. The trees loomed tall and silent, swallowing us in. The cabin itself was exactly as advertised, wood-paneled, cozy, and well-kept. The host had left detailed instructions in a binder on the kitchen counter, complete with emergency numbers and a hand-drawn map of the area. Everything seemed normal, peaceful even, until we saw the footprints. There, on the back deck, leading from the edge of the forest to the sliding glass door. A set of tracks, not ours. The snow was fresh, untouched everywhere else, except for those deep, deliberate prints leading right up to the house. They stopped at the door and didn't turn back. Megan and I stared at them for a long time. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the owner had come by to check on the place. Maybe a hiker had wandered too close, but there were no return tracks. Whoever had stood at that door had either entered or vanished. We checked the locks, all secured. The cabin was empty. Still, an unease settled over us, heavy and suffocating. That night, I struggled to sleep. The silence of the woods was deafening, pressing in from all sides. Sometime past midnight, just as I was finally drifting off, I heard it. A knock. Soft at first, then louder. Megan shot up beside me, eyes wide. I reached for my phone, but there was no signal. The Wi-Fi, which had been working earlier, was now completely dead. We sat in the dark, listening. The knock came again. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I forced myself to move, stepping carefully toward the window. My breath fogged the glass as I peered out. No one was there, but the footprints were, new ones, leading from the tree line to the front porch. The knock came again, and this time it was closer. Not at the front door, at the bedroom window. Megan stifled a scream. I grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand and flicked it on, aiming the beam at the window. The glare bounced back at me, revealing nothing but my own reflection and the swirling snow beyond. Another knock. This time it came from the back door. I ran to the living room, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The sliding glass door was locked, but as I shined my flashlight outside, something caught my eye. The footprints were gone, not covered by snowfall, just gone, as if they had never been there at all. The knocking stopped. For hours we sat in the center of the cabin, backs against each other, waiting. The wind howled outside, the trees groaned, but no more knocks came. At some point, exhaustion took over and I must have dozed off. I woke up to an eerie quiet. The air in the cabin felt heavier, colder. Megan was still curled up beside me, her breathing slow and steady. I glanced at the clock on the wall, 5:13 a.m. Then I heard it, a whisper. It was faint, barely more than the wind slipping through the cracks, but it was inside the house. I turned my head slowly toward the hallway leading to the bedroom. The door was open just a little wider than before. The whisper came again. A single word stretched and distorted. Open. My breath caught in my throat. I nudged Megan, shaking her awake. She blinked at me in confusion, then froze as the whisper repeated itself. Open. We didn't move. We just sat there, frozen as the words slithered through the air again. Then, slowly, the bedroom door creaked open. Just an inch, then another. I grabbed the fire poker from the hearth, gripping it so tightly my knuckles ached. Megan was shaking. We had locked that door. We had checked it. The whisper came one last time right behind us. "Open." We ran. We didn't stop to gather our things. We didn't look back. We burst through the front door into the freezing dawn, our breath coming in ragged gasps. The car was coated in ice, but I didn't care. I fumbled with the keys, hands numb and shaking, finally wrenching the door open. Megan scrambled in beside me, slamming the locks down. As I turned the key in the ignition, I risked one final glance at the cabin. The bedroom window was open. A handprint, large and smeared, pressed against the fogged-up glass from the inside. We drove nonstop until we hit the main road, the snow-covered trees blurring past us. Neither of us spoke until we were hours away. The host never responded to my messages. The listing was taken down a few days later. When I searched the address online, I found a local news report from years ago about a man who had gone missing in those woods. A hunter had found his cabin abandoned, the door wide open, footprints leading to the trees, but none returning. No trace of him was ever found, and according to the article, the last person to see him alive had heard 3 slow, deliberate knocks on his window. Only now do I wonder, what would have happened if we had opened the door? My family owns a remote cabin in northern Minnesota. It's deep in the woods, a few miles from the nearest neighbor, and right on the shore of a pristine, quiet lake. We spent most of our summers there when I was growing up, long days of swimming, fishing, and sitting by the fire, followed by cool, still nights where the only sound was the occasional call of a loon. The cabin itself is old, built by my great-grandfather. It's 2 stories with a steep attic under the peaked roof. When my sister and I were kids, we would climb up there with flashlights, pretending it was our secret clubhouse. The attic had one tiny round window that overlooked the lake, and at night, when the moon was full, it would cast eerie shadows on the wooden floor. As we grew older, the attic became more of a storage space than a playroom. Old furniture, boxes of forgotten belongings, even my grandfather's old hunting gear, things nobody wanted to get rid of but had no use for. After my grandparents passed away, my parents packed up more of their belongings and stacked them in the attic, sealing away memories they weren't ready to part with. Eventually, life got busier. My parents had demanding jobs, and my sister and I were caught up in school, then college. Our family trips became less frequent, and eventually the cabin sat empty for most of the year. My parents refused to rent it out, unwilling to let strangers into a place that had been in our family for generations. For the longest time, it just sat there, waiting. A couple of years ago, my dad decided to lease the cabin out for a year to an older man he met through a friend. The man was a retired carpenter, quiet and polite, and seemed like a perfect fit. He wanted somewhere peaceful to spend his time, and was even willing to do minor maintenance in exchange for a lower rent. My dad thought it was a great deal, someone to keep the place from falling into disrepair. We never actually met him. The arrangement was all done over the phone, and the key was left for him in a lockbox. My dad checked in occasionally, but everything seemed fine. The rent was paid on time, the cabin looked well maintained, and the man never gave any trouble. My dad liked to say he was the ideal tenant. Then, at the end of the lease, the man just disappeared. He didn't call, didn't leave a message. When my dad drove up to check on the place, he found the door locked and the key sitting on the porch railing. It was odd, but there was no sign of damage or anything missing. The only thing that stood out was that the attic hatch was left open. That summer, my family decided to spend a couple of weeks at the cabin, a nostalgic trip to reconnect with the place. It had been a few years since we'd all been there together, and I was looking forward to it. We packed up our old dog, Buster, and drove out, arriving just before sunset. Something felt off. The cabin looked the same, but the air was different. Maybe it was just because it had been empty for a while. but it felt colder inside, even though the summer heat was still thick in the air. Buster seemed nervous the moment we let him in. He paced around, sniffing everything, his ears twitching at every sound. That first night, we all slept lightly. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No crickets, no distant hoot of an owl, just the occasional creak of the old wooden beams settling. The second night, I woke up to a strange sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I focused, I realized it was something else. A soft, rhythmic creaking, like someone shifting their weight on loose floorboards. It was coming from above us, the attic. I told myself it was just the house settling, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I wasn't the only one. In the morning, my sister mentioned hearing strange noises in the night, too. My mom brushed it off, saying it was just animals in the attic. Maybe a raccoon had gotten in. We went about our day as usual, but as the sun set, that uneasy feeling returned. Buster refused to go near the attic hatch. He sat at the base of the stairs, staring up, ears flat, growling low in his throat. That night I woke again, but this time it was to Buster barking, loud, frantic barks that made my heart pound. I grabbed a flashlight and crept out of bed, my pulse in my ears. The attic hatch was ajar. I felt a chill rush over me. I woke my dad, and together we grabbed the heaviest things we could find, a fireplace poker and a hunting knife, and cautiously climbed the attic ladder. My dad was in front of me, moving slowly. When we reached the top, he shined the flashlight into the darkness. For a moment, nothing. Then, in the far corner, the light reflected off something. A pair of eyes. A man was crouched there, half hidden behind a stack of old boxes. He was filthy, his face gaunt, his clothes ragged. But the worst part, the part that still haunts me, was his expression. He wasn't shocked or scared. He was smiling. My dad didn't hesitate. He yelled, charging forward, and the man scrambled up, darting past us with unnatural speed. He bolted down the ladder and out the door before we could stop him. We called the police, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. The only sign he'd been there was a nest of filthy blankets and the attic window slightly open. The police didn't find much. No sign of forced entry. My dad checked the locks again, but there was no indication of how he had been getting in. They assumed he was a drifter who had stumbled upon the empty cabin and taken refuge. But we found something else. Going through the attic, we found strange things. Our old belongings moved, some things missing. And in the dust on the floor, faint handprints leading to the attic hatch. That was the last summer we spent at the cabin. My parents never leased it out again, and eventually they sold it. To this day, I wonder how long he had been there. How many nights had we slept beneath him, unaware of the silent figure watching from above? My name's Alex. I was 22 years old last summer when this happened. It started off like any other late-night hangout with my friend, Ben. We'd been friends since high school, and his family, like mine, wasn't rich. But we got by. Ben's family didn't own much, but they did have a cabin in the woods. It wasn't anything spectacular, but it was a getaway. And honestly, when the weather was right, that little cabin felt like paradise. One Friday evening, Ben invited me to stay the night. We hadn't hung out just the two of us in a while. It was a perfect opportunity to unwind, especially since I'd been stressed out from work and life in general. No plans, no obligations, just a few beers and a lot of laughs. The cabin was located about an hour outside the city, tucked away deep in a stretch of forest. The dirt road leading up to it wasn't well maintained, and we hadn't passed a single car for miles. It felt isolated, but that's the charm of it. It was the kind of place where the silence was thick. You could almost hear every little thing, from the rustling of leaves to the wind blowing through the trees. We arrived as the sun was setting, and Ben opened the door, letting the smell of old pine and fresh air fill our lungs. It was a warm evening, perfect for sitting out on the porch. Ben grabbed a few beers from the fridge, and we stepped outside to take in the view. The cabin sat on the edge of a small, secluded lake, and from the porch we could see the water reflecting the darkening sky. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and pine, and for a moment, everything felt still. That's when we noticed it. At first, it was a subtle flickering in the distance, far across the lake. I thought it might have been a reflection of the setting sun, or maybe even some lights from another cabin. But as I squinted to get a better look, I realized that wasn't the case. The light didn't seem to be coming from a house or a boat. It was too random, too erratic. "Hey, Ben, do you see that?" I asked, pointing toward the water. He looked up, squinting. "Yeah, what do you think it is? It's weird, right?" The light was flashing in a pattern, almost like someone was signaling us, but there was no rhythm to it. It was just sporadic bursts of light, like someone was turning a flashlight on and off across the lake. "Maybe someone's trying to get our attention," I suggested. But the more I looked at it, the more uneasy I felt. "Probably just some idiot messing around," Ben shrugged, but there was a slight hesitation in his voice. We both stared at it for a few more minutes. The light flashed a few more times, and then, as if someone had just flipped a switch, it stopped. We didn't say much. The silence that followed felt heavy, like it was charging the air with something off. It wasn't quite fear, but there was definitely something unsettling about the whole situation. I didn't know why, but I felt like something wasn't right. "I'm going to check it out," Ben said suddenly, breaking the silence. I turned to him, surprised. "What do you mean, check it out? It's probably just some idiot. I can't just leave it like that." "What if someone's in trouble?" he said, already standing up and heading toward the dock. "Ben, wait. It's probably nothing. Let's just leave it. We can call the cops later." But Ben was already at the dock, moving toward his boat. I could tell he wasn't going to drop it, so I sighed and followed him. We grabbed a flashlight, some rope, and headed out across the lake, the boat rocking gently with each step. The boat ride felt like it took forever, and the further we went, the darker it got. The moonlight barely pierced through the thick trees surrounding the lake, leaving the water almost pitch black. I was starting to feel an odd mix of curiosity and dread, but I kept my mouth shut. We reached the far side of the lake in what felt like an eternity. It wasn't a house on the other side like I'd expected. Instead, there was a strange, decaying shack, one that didn't look like it should have been standing for as long as it had. The windows were shattered, the roof half collapsed, and the front door hung open, creaking slightly in the wind. "What the hell is this?" I muttered, staring at the dilapidated structure. Ben didn't answer me. He was already stepping off the boat, tying it to a nearby tree. I followed him, unwilling to be left alone on the boat. We crept toward the shack. As we got closer, I could feel my heart rate pick up. The place felt wrong. There was something oppressive about it, like the air was heavier there. Ben pushed the door open with a creak, and the sound echoed through the trees. The inside of the shack was worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just abandoned. It looked like it had been untouched for years. The floor was covered in dust. The walls had peeling paint, and cobwebs covered every corner. But there was something else. There was a faint smell of something chemical. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it made my stomach churn. "Ben, this isn't funny. Let's go," I said, starting to back away. But Ben was already moving deeper into the shack, his flashlight scanning the dark corners. That's when we heard it. A faint sound, like the soft clicking of something mechanical. "Ben, do you hear that?" I whispered, my voice low. He nodded, his face pale. "It's coming from upstairs," he said. I didn't want to go upstairs, but Ben was already making his way toward the staircase, his steps slow and deliberate. I hesitated but followed. The stairs creaked under our weight, and I thought for sure we were going to fall through. When we reached the top, we saw a door at the end of the hallway. The clicking sound was louder now. It almost sounded like a typewriter, but there was something unnatural about it. Ben pushed the door open, and I immediately wished he hadn't. Inside was a room filled with old, rusty equipment, tools, machines, and wires running across the floor in strange patterns. At the center of the room was a projector, aimed directly at the wall, the same wall where a flickering light had been coming from. "Why is this here?" I asked, my voice shaky. "I don't know. This is messed up," Ben said, backing away from the machine. Before I could say anything, I heard something. A door, maybe a closet, creaked open behind us. I turned around, expecting to see some kind of figure, but the room was empty. "That's it," I said. "We're leaving. Right now." Ben didn't argue. We sprinted out of the room, back down the stairs, and out of the shack. But as we reached the boat, I saw something that stopped me cold. The boat was gone. Someone had taken it. I turned to Ben, but before I could speak, I saw a figure at the edge of the woods. It was just standing there, watching us. I couldn't make out any details, but I could feel its eyes on me. I knew we needed to leave, but without the boat, we were stuck. Ben didn't wait for me to say anything. He grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the trees, heading for the road. We ran, not stopping until we reached the cabin. I didn't look back the entire way, but I could feel someone, or something, chasing us. The footsteps were quick, close, and heavy, but when we reached the cabin and slammed the door shut behind us, the sounds stopped. We locked every door and window and sat in the dark, not speaking for what felt like hours. When we finally called the police, they didn't believe us. They said there was no sign of anyone else in the area, no evidence of anyone taking the boat. Just an abandoned shack and a bunch of weird equipment. Ben and I never spoke about that night again. We didn't have to. We both knew something had happened there, something we would never understand. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that whatever was in that shack is still out there, waiting. And I know one thing for sure. I'll never go back to that lake.